am Katie Foltz. I'm the Associate Director of Operations and Student Success within Residence Life.
And I'm Chineri Turner. I am the Associate Director for Student Engagement and Belonging.
So welcome to Leases Over Lunch, some renting 101 information for you. Some things tell me, what are some of the things that you have been thinking about as you start talking about getting an apartment off campus? Yes.
How much down payment?
Down payment, how much money you need to have?
Yes.
Yes.
Credit.
Credit, do you have to have a credit score? Yes, good question.
The average bills and rent around the area.
Average bills and rent around the area, yeah, utilities, important. Yes?
How long the lease is, like if it goes over the summer too?
A lease, how long the lease is? Very good. Okay. So, it's a lot of information. Where do you start? So a couple of the things that we really want to encourage you to think about is starting 2 to 3 months in advance. Now, it is February. Good question on the thought on the lease component. When does a lease start? So if you think about in this area, a lot of college students, they graduate in May, meaning they may be vacating their lease. So leases could start in May, June, July, depending, correct? And so it's important that you think about that. What is 3 months ahead of that? So you want to start looking now so you have context to look at the various locations. Where do you want to live? If you are interested in a little bit of a commute and you're like, hey, I'm okay living in Marietta and I'll drive up, great. Or I'm living a little bit north, I want to live up in Woodstock, I'll drive south. That sounds great. You just need to be aware, where do you want to live? What do you want to have around you, amenities, etc. Communication, calling these locations and asking a lot of questions. And then plan, go see the properties. How many of you have signed a lease without looking at the apartment? I would not recommend it, okay? You don't know what the space looks like. The pictures are wonderful. They use professional cameras to take those, right? Know your budget. Location is going to impact your budget. How much do you have in savings? How much do they require? Do they require first, last, plus a security deposit?
Yep.
That could be a heavy lift, right? And then what does the application process look like, right? Is there an application fee? Sometimes there are places that have them. Not everywhere does, but you have to make sure you ask those questions.
Yeah. I will also include, in terms of what is in your budget and what you want to save for, this also includes if you have laundry in your unit versus if you have to go somewhere else for laundry. That means that you're more than likely, if it's not in your unit, you're going to be charged additional money, or you're going to have to come out of pocket to do things like laundry. That also includes parking. A lot of places, if you are not looking in the city, they don't have parking fees. However, the closer you are to any city, the higher the chances are that you're going to have to pay an additional parking fee. And then that can also include, as was mentioned before, in terms of application fee. If you have a pet, how many of you have pets or want a pet? If you have a pet, more than likely that is an additional fee that you're going to have to pay as well. So I would start thinking about all of those different things and factor it into your budget.
And I will say, thinking about what you said, pet, made me think about ESA, an emotional service animal, a support animal versus a service animal are two very different things. And so you need to make sure if you're getting a pet and you're like, oh, this is a medical accommodation, you have to be able to prove that to be able to have fees associated waived or whatnot, okay? So some good things to start with. Apartments.com, who's heard of it? Okay.
Yes.
And then if you look on, if you were to like do a quick Google search and say Kennesaw State University off-campus housing, we have a whole website that's dedicated to it, and it pulls from area properties around the institution. It'll help give you an understanding of some of the costs, right? And so this is something that was pulled together previously. It gives you a little bit of a range for the difference in Kennesaw, Marietta versus Smyrna. Smyrna is going to be a little more expensive, a little further closer to the city, right? But it really depends on what you're interested in. And if you can see the little bullet points, it sort of outlines, is it 1 bedroom? Is it 2 bedrooms, right? How many of you want a roommate? That could increase your cost, right? So that's something to keep in mind. How many of you plan to use your financial aid next year to help pay your rent? So some context to things to think about. I will say on-campus housing, your financial aid does cover that. It goes right into, when it comes in, it's dispersed into your account, it pays your tuition, and then it goes to housing, and then it moves on down the line, right? You can see that the average cost of housing on campus is about $8,700, depending on where you're living on campus, right? So some areas might be a little higher or a little lower. And then off-campus housing, you can see you can use your financial aid for off-campus housing, but you have to think about the refund process. So after tuition and fees are paid, the remaining funds come to you. So they might go to your bank account, and then you can utilize that. So if they give you $10,000, you get financial aid $10,000, and your tuition costs $5,000, and your fees cost $1,000, you now only have $4,000 left. So you have to think about how do you want to use that $4,000, right? Off-campus housing typically does cost a little bit more. That's why if you think about having a roommate, you can cut those costs down a little bit. You might still have to share a room, share a bathroom or a kitchen, right? But it does help cut those costs down. And then thinking about your types of financial aid there. So grants and scholarships, they can be applied to both on-campus and off-campus. So you have to look at what do you have coming in. Student loans, federal and private, can be used for both. But you do want to look at the fine print, right? Is there anything about, like if you have your federal loan, it has probably a different interest rate than if you did a private loan, and so you want to make sure you're using your funds appropriately. And then work-study programs. So if you are working on campus and you're earning money and your federal work-study, you can use some of those funds. Will then come back to you like in a paycheck where you'd be able to pay your rent. Costs and qualifications. So a lot of this was offered as things to think about. So many places say you need to be making 3 times the rent you have a month before taxes to be able to start there, right? They want to look at your financial history. So when you apply, they're going to say, okay, show me how much money that you have coming in. And so you have to think about what does that show them, right? They want to see that you have had good history in paying. They want to see that you have had, you have enough income to cover your rent. If you were to lose a job, can you cover your rent until you get a new job? Those types of things. That's a lot to think about as a college student, because you're like, maybe I'm not working full time. That's why it's important to connect with, hey, do I need a roommate? Talking to the companies about how much do they require for you to have in savings, or do they require for you to have for a down payment? Question, yes?
There's people on scholarship that has their housing covered. What would they need to be shown?
So people who have their housing covered by scholarship, what needs to be shown to the company that you're going to rent from? That would be something you want to make sure you ask them. So some companies require that you demonstrate that you have the income in your account, or they demonstrate that you have the monthly income. So it depends on the location. Okay. Know your credit score or average credit score. Typically a minimum of 600 is needed. 18 years or higher to rent an apartment. Okay, credit scores are an interesting thing. You want to ask them, are they going to run a credit check? Credit checks, when they run a credit check, it impacts your credit check, right? It doesn't impact it for an extended period of time, but it does impact it for a short period of time. So if you said, I'm going to get this apartment, but I just bought a car and I opened a credit card, when they look at your credit, that's 3 hard pulls. Versus a soft pull is they just do like a generic look. A hard pull is like reaching out to all credit history, okay? So make sure you do some research on your credit score and all that information. A lot of banks now have it, like if you open your bank account and you have the app on your phone, you can see what your credit score is, and it depends on what company you're working with as well as to how they pull that information. Will I do this alone? Will I do it with roommates? Do you need co-signers? So some places, if you are 18 and under, you cannot rent, right? That's pretty straightforward. Some places or locations may say, oh, we're only going to do 21 or older for our applications. So you may need to have a co-signer, or they say, oh, you don't make enough, but if you co-sign with this another person, combine your incomes cover the cost of your rent. And so that's where parents, guardians, having multiple people or roommates help identify what that cost could be. You're showing a greater income that way. Okay.
I do want to add with when it comes to co-signers, there are additional stipulations, and sometimes they want your co-signer to basically meet the same stipulations that you would be making as well. So even if that person isn't going to be living in the apartment with you, they may still want to do the same credit check. They may still want to verify their income. I will also say, when I tried to get my first apartment, my mom did not live in the United States. And at the time, my mom was helping me pay for rent. However, when I was applying for apartments, they denied my application because my mom did not live in the United States and did not live in the region. So that's also something to think about if you have a parent, or if your parent or guardian does not live in the state or does not live in the United States, they may not want you to use that cosigner. So that's something else to thinking about when you're thinking about cost and qualifications. And they may want you to have, they also may want you to verify your income and things like that, especially if you do not have previous renters history. So if you have never rented an apartment before, they may want you to show that you're able to maintain your rent. And this also is if you have had an apartment before and if you have been previously denied by that apartment complex, or if you have been evicted. Those are all things that they are going to ask as well.
Some things to think about for cosigner as well is their financial situation impacts yours and yours impacts them. Yes. So what that means is if they have rented or they have a mortgage, right? They have their house and they default on their mortgage. They don't pay their mortgage 1 month. That could impact you because then maybe you're not able to make payment on your rent, or vice versa. You don't make payment on your rent, and therefore they, as your cosigner, are impacted negatively. So that's important to keep in mind. And it's important to keep in mind how much you're asking for at this component too. I'll give an example. I know someone who got a new car. I think they were in college when they did it, and their cosigner allowed it to look like they made way more income than they really did, right? And so the dealership was like, oh, your cosigner makes, say, $50,000 a year, you make 20, that means we can approve you for a loan that is X amount of dollars, but in reality, she couldn't make that X amount of dollars in loan payment every month because that's not truly her income. They were combining two incomes together. So don't think, oh, I can get a really fancy apartment because I have a much higher income. No, you still need to live within your means, you as an individual, because if they drop the ball, it impacts you, and if you drop the ball, it impacts them. So additional costs, we talked about this a little bit. So application, admin fees, pet fees, security deposit, gates and access fees. So if you're in say a gated community, it might have an additional cost because they do have someone that might be working that gate, right? Utilities, so power, gas, trash, water and sewer, those are not always incorporated into your fees for your apartment or your rent. So when you get to an apartment you're interested in renting, you want to make sure to ask those questions. What is included and what's not? You have to potentially contact a third party. It doesn't even include, it does down here. We have it in number 4. Okay, so 3 is insurance. Renter's insurance is something that I highly, highly, highly encourage. Some places may even require it. I'm not even sure. We encourage it on campus, but once you live off campus, you would not fall under, say you've been utilizing, your parents have a homeowner's insurance policy and it sometimes can cover you for living on campus. That doesn't happen once you get an apartment. You have to have a separate policy for that. Think about personal liability. So that means if somebody comes over to your apartment and they get hurt for some reason in your apartment, how does your insurance help cover that so they don't sue you and you are responsible for their injury, right? Personal property, so thinking about the things that you're going to put in your apartment, right? If you get a $3,000 TV, you may be interested in adding an extra rider to your insurance, right? If you have expensive jewelry, you get that, right? So a lot of people get their wedding rings insured. That's something to consider, and a rider on your insurance.
So in terms of insurance, the majority of places, especially when I was trying to find apartments, they do require renter's insurance, and they don't just require renter's insurance, they require you, or they can require you to have a minimum amount on that renter's insurance. So sometimes it'll be $50,000, sometimes I've seen it's $100,000 that is covered. That is also something that comes out of your pocket that you have to continue to pay, and every time you renew your lease, they are going to require you to renew that renter's insurance. So that's technically an additional cost that is not included in your rent or your utilities, that is going to come out of your pocket, and that you also have to make sure that you are maintaining. Some of the renter's insurance, it depends on what type of insurance that you have. It can include some of the other things that we talked about, and it also, the other piece is if you have a roommate, the two of you will need to discuss who is going to, or how you can both ensure that both of your names are on the renter's insurance. That way it covers both of you, and it also covers the personal property, the liability, all of that stuff as well.
The insurance is actually, renter's insurance, when I had it, wasn't horribly expensive. There are several companies you can go through, like State Farm, Progressive, Lemonade is a company that I've known a lot of people to use, but you want to get it prior to an event happening. Yes. So, good example. A few years ago, we had pipes burst on campus, and it impacted a lot of students' rooms. It happened on off-campus properties as well. People were like, oh, I should get some renter's insurance. The insurance company puts a freeze during certain periods of time, especially when there is bad weather. So this hurricane that came in the fall, when we knew it was coming in, and as soon as the insurance companies found out, they locked their systems down, so you couldn't be like, oh, I need to get renter's insurance today, because they knew, oh, we could see an influx, and then we could see an influx in claims. So you want to make sure that you do it right when you move in so that you don't get caught in a predicament later. Cable and internet. So think about what providers you're using. I can't read that word, sorry. Streaming services you're using. So are you using Netflix, Hulu, etc.? And then you have a phone as well. So what does that come with? Look at packages that you could get. Look at options. You want to have reliable internet when you're doing homework, right? So keep that in mind. And then life costs. And I'm sure this doesn't even list all of them. Groceries, gas, your car insurance, washer and dryer. What are the additional things you have in life? Do you have a membership to a gym off campus? Do you have, you anticipate going shopping on a regular basis? That's something you have a lifestyle that you want to continue to maintain. You need to be able to live within that means then, okay?
When you are looking at apartments, sometimes apartments will advertise the rent only. However, they have required other fees. So how we were just talking about cable and internet, renter's insurance, utilities, those things oftentimes are not going to show up in your rent, but they're still going to show up on your bill. And if you pay your rent, but then you don't pay any of the other fees, that can also include your pet fee or pest, like when they try to spray for insects and all of that type of stuff. That is also something that is technically still going to make the cost that the total cost that you're paying a lot more. So for example, the apartment complex that I stay in, they have cable and internet. However, I had to use their specific internet service. So I couldn't go out and get another one. I had to pay for theirs, which pros and cons, it's like great, I didn't have to worry about it, but at the same time, the internet is very slow in my apartment. So that's something to consider. If it's already included, then it may be a little cheaper. However, you may get slower internet.
and you can't negotiate your rates. That's important for you to keep in mind. When you talk to a company, you ask them, is this the best deal and rate you can give me? And being able to compare it. So I've done the like, hey, this company said that they can make this, but I really would appreciate working with your company, so can you match that rate? And sometimes they will price match, so it's important to negotiate for that every
And
penny.
sometimes they will include streaming services with that as well.
Yes.
So if you have the internet, or if you have a phone bill or whatever the case is, then they'll include Hulu or they'll include Netflix. So even if they won't come down on the price, maybe you'll get some additional options. That way you can keep up when Bridgerton comes back out. You have to make sure that you, on your renter's insurance, that you are including the property, and their address, as well as sometimes they're listed, like it's called, the apartment is called one thing, however, the overall company is called something else. They want to make sure that their address is listed properly, as well as the interest party or who you are renting from, and that holding company is included.
Apartment tours. So visit properties. You can call, schedule an appointment. Sometimes they do walk-ins. You want to make sure you go. An agent will guide you through. You can do a virtual tour, like the different types of apartments that they may have. And then sometimes they have self-guided tours you can do. So it's important to call and ask. One thing that I would recommend as you're going through is, if they'll allow you to, turn on the water, look at the water pressure. Is that something you're like, oh, that's a trickle? Is this everywhere in here? Is that just this apartment, right? You look at the carpet, like, has the carpet been cleaned? How is it maintained? Look in the hallways as you're walking down to the apartment. Look in the lobbies so that you can see if they're taking care of the general property as well as the internal property.
I also want to note, it's when you are doing apartment tours, there is a difference between their showroom and the actual apartment you are going to be in. So if possible, I would ask them, can I view the room or the unit that I am going to be staying in? Or can I have specific pictures of the unit that I'm going to be staying in? Because I promise you, their showroom, when they say, yeah, of course, you can do a tour right now, it is specifically designed to get you to sign the lease. It may not look the same way, and also sometimes they put things on there like, you have a lake view, you are sitting at the top of the hill, or this one has a fireplace, right? However, every little change in that, one, it can up the cost of rent. So they said that I had a lake view. It is a lake that is behind a forest, so I don't actually have a lake view. Now, I also have a fireplace, but what they don't say is when they have a fireplace, it usually changes the way that you can set up your apartment in terms of like your furniture. So if you already have a lot of furniture, you really want to think about, is the furniture that I have going to work in the room or in the unit that I'm in, because you don't want to have to get additional furniture or change things. So I would definitely ask if you can view the specific unit, as well as if they have the virtual tours, like the 360 where you can kind of move around. I would also ask for the dimensions, ask for as much information as possible.
So yeah, I would encourage you to think about, like, oh, you found out your unit. If you have the ability, once you find out your unit, come and take a look at that unit if they're able to give it to you. As well as when you move in, being able to, you said you reported it previous to it, being able to say, no, this needs to be fixed before I moved in.
Yes.
Because you can say, they have a contract that they live up to, you have a contract you have to live up to. They haven't lived up to theirs yet, so you have no reason to move in.
Yes, and I would also make sure that you put all of this in writing. So before you move in and do a walkthrough of your apartment, take pictures, all of the things that are messed up, wrong, the carpet, the paint job, every little thing, and then take pictures of it, email it to them and say, hey, these are all of the issues that I found in this apartment complex. I want to make sure that they're fixed before I move in. Or at the end, as you said, they try to charge you for it. Make sure that you basically send an email of what they're saying back to yourself. That way when you move out and they try to charge you for it, you can say, no, actually, remember you said you were going to fix this.
Some pictures of things you want to make sure you're looking for. If you do look at like more of a home, you're going to want to look at like the garage, what space in the garage is being used. You want to look at electrical because that's going to be a big thing. We want to make sure that you're actually in a safe unit. Carpet, and then think about the bathroom. Like, is everything put together? Are the doors on the hinges? Everything like that. Is it clean and up to standards? Some of it could be that it is wear and tear. Some of it could be that it just hasn't been cleaned up properly in the moment. So make sure that you make documentation of that. You found the perfect apartment you would like to rent, right? You want to think about the application process. You can complete the application online or in person, depends on the location. My guess is the majority of them will be online at this point. I would encourage you still to go there in person and make sure that you see the place, maybe talk to the individuals that you're actually gonna be working with. Because if they're not easy to work with in the application process, what does that mean for living there, right? Yep. Submit all the required documentation. That could be your bank statements, that could be verification of income, that could be verification of identity. Some places say credit check. Make sure you look up what is truly required of you, right? I know places that are like, oh, you have to have X, Y, and Z, and legally that's actually something that they can't ask for. So that's something for you to be aware of. What are they asking for, and is it something they truly need? And then you wait the screening process. They review them. Sadly, we are in an area that has a lot of apartment complexes, and so in some capacities, they can be picky. If they have someone who comes in and says, hey, yeah, I can guarantee income for the next 6 to 12 months today, that person might get picked over you who's saying, yes, I have income on a regular basis, I will pay my rent, but I can't pay you 6 months in advance. I couldn't pay 6 months in advance either. They'll deny you or they'll approve you. So if they deny you, you can ask, why did I get denied? Get that information so that you can fix that on the next round, or you can come back and say, just kidding, here's the information you need. And then if you get it, great, you got it. Now you have to look at the next steps in the process, making sure you get your insurance set up, identifying when do you move in, do I have roommates, what furniture do I need, all those types of things. So next steps, deposit, move-in date, prorate utilities. So if you rent is $3,000 a month, starting the 1st through the 31st, but you move in on the 15th, they will take that cost of rent, or they should take that cost of rent. They should divide it by the days that you are actually in the unit, and that's what you owe. Right? So they will prorate that. Utilities, it depends if it's included in your rate or not. But utilities, if you set them up separately, it would just start on that date. So you may have rent due on the 1st, but your internet bill is not due until the 15th. So that's something to keep in mind. Renter's insurance, you want to get that set up. You'll finally get your keys. You want to do, you'll do your walkthrough, and then you'll move in. Some red flags you want to think about. How easy is it to get a tour? How easy is it to work with the individuals that are in the leasing office? If you know people that are already living in the complex, you can ask them questions. If you are walking in the complex and you see that people are there and they're willing to talk to you, ask them questions. How easy is it for me to get a facilities issue fixed? What are your concerns living here? How safety concerns, travel from campus to the apartment complex or vice versa, parking, etc.
I would also look at so the reviews of apartment complex, because sometimes people will leave reviews while they are currently living there or after they have moved. I have apartment complex, or at my apartment complex, we have a gate, and one of the main things that I saw on the reviews is the gate is always broke. Like, if you stay here, just know that the gate is going to be broke, and I promise you that was very accurate, and my gate is always broke. Now, to me, that wasn't the deciding factor for me. I was like, okay, I'm fine with a gate or without a gate. So that didn't persuade me one way or the other. What did help was that everyone said every time that I put in a maintenance ticket, it was done immediately. They're really helpful. All the people on site are really nice. That was something that I thought was a green flag, and I felt like it outweighed the gate always being broke. Avoiding scams. Big thing here. I would never sign a lease without going to the space, without talking to the individuals, never forward
not forward, send funds. If it's going to be via PayPal or Venmo, it's not going to be same as reputable as if you are in an apartment complex that has an actual payment portal that you go to, or you have a place that you go and you drop your check off every month. And so making sure you think about what those scams are, and if you're like, hey, this feels fishy, it probably is fishy. Trust your gut, and if you're unsure, ask someone else, right? Ask someone you trust. You can come ask me. I can't guarantee I'll be able to answer the question, but we can definitely look through it. Co-signers, who's that going to be for you? Rent increases and renewals. So they do have the ability to increase your rent. When do they have the ability to increase your rent? Is it after 6 months? Is it that it's on a year lease? Are you rent controlled where it's the same and you don't want to move for 4 years? You want to make sure you take a look at that, okay? Leasing terms. So you are going to get, when there's like, hey, you can sign your lease, and then we like, just sign here. Well, it's going to be a fairly large document. Take your time, read through it, and make sure you understand it. If you're reading something and you go, this does not make sense, please explain this to me. Let me review this with someone who has a better understanding of leases, so that you make sure that you are not getting duped, right? Subleasing or a roommate release. So say you go in and you're like, I'm going to rent this on my own because I don't want to have to deal with a roommate that doesn't pay rent or whatnot. Well, what does your lease say? Can it only be occupied by the person on the lease, or does it have to be, or can you have other people there? Don't get yourself into a situation. The other aspect of that, sublease wise, is you say, okay, great, I have an apartment. I'm gonna go abroad in January. Can you have someone take over your lease? Can you sublet to someone while you are abroad? It may or may not have a clause in the lease for that, as well as if you do it illegally, right? You say, oh, they're just gonna pay me, I'll pay the rent, I'll continue to be there, but I'm not there. What's that impact on you? Maintenance concerns, and then renter's rights. Read your lease. There are tenants' laws. They vary state to state. So it is important for you to know your rights as a tenant going into your space. So say someone's not fixing something and you find apparent mold growth in your apartment and you report that and they don't fix it in a timely manner, there could be a consequence to that. So you want to make sure you do the research so you're not stuck in an apartment that is not healthy for you to be in. There are certain things like, how do you break a lease? That's things that you want to make sure that you take a look into. I would say the same thing when you're reading the lease. If you do end up breaking the lease, what is the impact on you? There is probably a charge to that.
Yeah, so I would also, when it comes to leases, make sure that, again, just reiterating that you need to read everything. I have had a lease where they included where I basically was signing over the rights for them to use me in any photography, videos, and everything for the apartment complex. So they could then, if I'm at one of their events, they could then use that photograph or that video of me on all of their social media, on their websites. So they try to, some apartment complex will try to include additional things in your lease, and that's also why you want to make sure that you're reading over everything. Also, when it comes time for you to, if you want to renew your lease, or let's say you don't want to renew your lease, majority of the times if you decide that you no longer want to renew your lease, they will have a stipulation in there of the notice, the time notice that you will have to provide them. And oftentimes it's not like, oh, my lease is supposed to be renewed January 16th. On the 15th, I can go and tell them that I don't want to renew. Oftentimes, they're going to say you need 30 days or sometimes even 60 days to notify them that you're not going to renew your lease. And the same is if you want to break your lease or you want to break the contract. They can then say you have to pay for all of the months that you have left in your lease, and in addition to that, still due a fee. So if you break your lease, it ends up being very, very expensive, and that's typically something that they put in that contract. But again, you want to make sure that you know your rights and you know what it is, because there's also stipulations in there as well. Like, for example, if you're in the military and you're going on active duty orders, they have to let you out of that lease. That's a requirement by law.
A few of the questions that you would want to ask when you're going to these locations, right? How do I pay my rent and how are late fees assessed? So pay your rent by the first of the month. If not, we charge you X amount per day. That could be costly if you're not aware of that. How much will I pay in upfront costs, right? First, last, security deposit, plus utilities. So that first month could feel like a punch in the gut. So make sure that you're very aware of that.
And sometimes they want you to do a cashier's check instead of paying through their system, just in case you haven't properly registered or whatever the case is. I've had multiple apartment complexes that have required me to do a cashier's check and not just swipe my card for the first and last month.
Like a money order check?
Yes.
Yeah, like you go to the bank and say, I need a cashier's check, and they'll print one for you.
Cashier's check, money order, yes.
A few more would be how often does rent go up? How much does it go up? Some things to think about. Asking them about, is there a furnished apartment option? Sometimes apartments have furnished. Doesn't mean it's going to be the most glamorous furniture, but it's something to ask about and it's something to see if you can get a tour then. Storage and parking. If you're in an apartment that doesn't have a lot of storage, sometimes they have storage units in other areas of the complex, and so that's something to ask. And then what is parking? Do you need to park your car way over here and your apartment's way over here, and so walking back from class at night, it's 11 o'clock at night and you have to walk a half mile from your car to your apartment? Something to think about. And then the last one I have not the last one, sorry. Changes that can be made to the unit. You are a renter, right? You're not an owner. So if you paint the wall, what do you have to paint it back? Are you allowed to paint it? Can you put peel and stick up on the wall, whatnot? Where does mail come? Where do deliveries go? Amazon's my best friend. It comes to my front door. It may not come to your front door anymore, right? And so it's important to make sure you ask those questions before you move in. Plans for updates to the building. So if you find an apartment and you moved into that apartment and you're like, I love it, I want to stay in this apartment for 3 years, and then all of a sudden they say to you, hey, by the way, you have to move because we're going to put you in this unit over here because we're going to renovate this building. They probably know that already. So you want to ask those questions. What are renovations plans and timelines so that you can be aware of them? And then just some things to think about: community guest policy, quiet hours. You're not on campus anymore. You don't have someone that can come and knock on the door and tell them, hey, please be quiet. You actually would have to call the police for those types of things. So you want to ask them, are there policies that are internal that you need to be aware of?
Also, some of the apartment complexes have almost like resident portals or resident chats as well, and sometimes you'll get that. So if someone's being too loud, they can put it in there, hey, y'all are being a little too loud, can y'all quiet down? I always say that it's a really good habit to get to know your neighbors, because that's the difference between them calling the cops or them just knocking on your apartment door and saying like, hey, can you keep it down, or whatever it is. If you develop really good relationships with your neighbors and you build community even in the apartment complexes, it makes life a whole lot easier.
Feel like you got something? You ready to go get an apartment?
Maybe.
Perfect.